You can get married any time, Emily. But this is my first baby. That was what my sister said to me 6 weeks before my wedding in a voice so soft that if someone had only heard it in passing, they would have thought Vanessa Carter was talking about rescheduling lunch, not taking away the most important day of my life. I still remember standing frozen by the window of my small apartment in New Haven, my phone in my hand, staring down at the damp, cold street after the rain. Outside, people kept moving as if everything were normal. A man walked his dog across the crosswalk. A young woman clutched a paper bag and hurried into a coffee shop. Life went on as though no one had just told me that my wedding could be moved, ignored, and treated like some minor inconvenience to the family. But I could not go on as if everything were normal. If you have ever been dismissed by your own family during one of the most important moments of your life, comment 1. So I know I am not the only person who understands that feeling. Vanessa did not ask if I was hurt. She did not ask how much money I had already put down, whether the invitations had been sent, or how long I had spent preparing the wedding dress. She simply said her baby shower would be held on that exact day, at that exact time, at an upscale country club in Greenwich. She said it as if it were just an unfortunate coincidence. But I knew my sister. I knew the way she went quiet when she was calculating something. I knew the way she smiled when she wanted someone else to feel selfish on their own. My wedding date had been set months earlier. It was supposed to be a small ceremony in a garden near Mystic, Connecticut. 42 white chairs, wildflowers, thin veils of fabric, and a wooden arch that Noah, my fiancé, had built himself from old boards. We did not have a ballroom, a grand orchestra, or a 5-tier wedding cake. But it was our day. A simple day, poorer than Vanessa's wedding, but more sincere than every luxurious party my family had ever hosted. And yet, one by one, they chose her. My mother chose her. My aunts chose her. My cousins chose her. And in the end, the father who had once held my hand when I was little, the father who had promised to walk me down the aisle, chose her too. I did not truly understand what abandonment felt like until I stood in front of 42 wedding chairs and saw 35 of them empty. 7 people came to my wedding. Only 7. But weeks later, when a photo from my honeymoon appeared online, 417 calls and messages flooded my phone like a storm. The same people who could not send even one congratulation on my wedding day suddenly wanted to know where I was, who I was with, and why I was standing on the deck of a yacht off the coast of Monaco in the arms of the man they had once called a man with no future. My name is Emily Carter. That year I was 28 years old, a freelance illustrator living in a rented studio with peeling walls, a kitchen table stained with watercolor, and an old sofa I had bought from a student who was moving out. I was not rich. I did not stand out at family dinners. I did not know how to make my parents proud with the kinds of things they could brag about to the neighbors. But I had one thing they had never truly seen. I had Noah Bennett. And 6 months before the wedding, during Thanksgiving dinner at my family's White House in Glastonbury, my father looked Noah straight in the eye and asked a question that made the entire table fall silent. When are you going to get a real job? At the time, I thought that was the worst moment. I was wrong. Because from that question, everything began to fall apart. Slowly. Painfully. And in the end, no one in my family could pretend they were innocent anymore. In the Carter family, there was a rule no one ever wrote down, but everyone lived by it. Vanessa was always the center. If she was happy, the whole family breathed easier. If she was angry, everyone immediately searched for a way to make things right. And Emily, was usually the one expected to be understanding, to step back, to give way. My father, Thomas Carter, had worked as a branch manager for a local bank in Hartford for nearly 30 years. He was the kind of man who always kept his shoes polished, hung his coat on the proper hook, and believed a person was only worthy of respect if they had a stable job, a steady paycheck, good insurance, and a clear title on a business card. He rarely shouted. But he had a way of hurting people with silence and disappointed eyes. My mother, Margaret Carter, was different. She was softer, gentler, but that gentleness often made me feel more suffocated than anger ever could. She used to say, "I just want this family to stay peaceful." And in her definition, peaceful meant no one was allowed to upset Vanessa, while I had to swallow everything on my own. Our house in Glastonbury looked beautiful from the outside. White walls, black shutters, a stone walkway, and 2 hydrangea bushes that bloomed every summer. Visitors would say the Carter family was admirable, but I had grown up in that house long enough to know that some homes shine brighter on the outside because they are so good at hiding the darkness within. Vanessa was 4 years older than me. She was beautiful, charming, and knew how to walk into a room and make every pair of eyes turn toward her. When I was little, I admired her. I used to think that if I were better behaved, better dressed, better at conversation, maybe my parents would look at me as long as they looked at Vanessa. But then I realized some positions in a family are assigned very early. 5 years earlier, Vanessa married Grant Whitmore, the son of a family in commercial real estate in Fairfield County. After that wedding, her place in the family became untouchable. Grant bought her a shiny SUV, a Cartier bracelet, and vacations. My mother retold stories about again and again. More importantly, Grant began paying part of my parents' mortgage. He gave my mother a secondary credit card and paid to renovate the kitchen. She still called the dream of her life. From that day on, the favoritism in my family was no longer just emotional. It came with bills, statements, and gifts wrapped in tissue paper. My parents never said they were afraid of upsetting Vanessa because of money. They only said she carried bigger responsibilities and needed more support. And what about me? I illustrated children's books, took freelance jobs, earned well some months, and counted every bill in others. In my father's eyes, that was not a career. It was just a phase that had gone on for far too long. Every family dinner followed the same rhythm. Vanessa talked about who Grant had met, what he had bought, and which project he had invested in. My mother listened as if she were hearing a report on success itself. My father nodded and asked more about the market, about interest rates. When it was my turn to talk about a book cover I had just finished, the table usually went quiet very quickly. No one told me to be silent. They simply stopped asking questions. I used to think that if I ever got married, my family would be different. I used to believe my father would stand beside me, my mother would cry when she saw me in my wedding dress, and Vanessa would hug me and say that it was finally my turn to be happy. But in the Carter family, my happiness was only allowed to exist as long as it did not block Vanessa's light. I met Noah Bennett on an October afternoon at a small art fair in New Haven. It was cold that day, with a fine drizzle falling from the sky. I was walking past a booth made of white canvas about to leave, when I saw an oil painting placed in the center. It showed a woman sitting on the steps of a fire escape holding an open book in her hands, her face turned toward the golden light at the end of the day. There was nothing dramatic about that painting. No tears, no collapse, no obvious heartbreak. But I stood in front of it for a long time because the woman in the painting looked lonely, without looking weak, quiet, without disappearing. Then I heard a man's voice behind me speaking softly, almost as if he were talking to the painting itself. "The light on her shoulder is still wrong." I turned around. Noah stood there with a few streaks of paint on his coat, his hair slightly messy from the wind, his eyes so focused that he almost seemed to forget someone was looking at him. He was not like other artists I had met, the kind who spoke about their work as if they were performing. Noah looked at the painting as though he were looking at a mistake that needed to be fixed, a truth that had not yet been fully told. I laughed. He turned to me a little embarrassed, then laughed too. It was only a small moment, but I still remember it clearly. Some meetings do not arrive with noise or warning signs. They simply step quietly into your life, then stay longer than everything that was ever promised. Noah was a contemporary realist painter. He painted portraits, old streets, windows, and rooms where light slanted across wooden floors. He did not paint to shock people. He painted to preserve the moments most people usually overlooked. An empty chair after dinner. A hand resting on the edge of a table. A silent room after family members had left. I loved the way he saw the world. But my family did not. To my father, a man without a fixed salary was a risk. To my mother, a painter living on the money from sold canvases was far too unstable. And to Vanessa, Noah was simply proof that I had never known how to choose anything worthy. 3 years after that first meeting, Noah and I were living together in a ground-floor studio on Elm Street. That room was both our home and our workspace. The corner near the window belonged to Noah's easel, always turned north to catch the cool light he loved. In winter, the wind slipped through the gaps in the door, and we had to wrap ourselves in blankets while eating dinner. In summer, the smell of linseed oil coffee and drawing paper blended together into a scent that belonged only to us. Our landlord was Arthur Whitman, a man in his 60s with silver hair and a thin frame. He often wore a brown corduroy jacket and drank black coffee from a chipped mug. He rented the studio to us at a price so low, it was almost unreasonable. When I asked him why, he only shrugged. I like hearing young people work more than old people complain. I thought Arthur was simply a kind, slightly eccentric landlord. From time to time, he would come down to the ground floor, stand beside Noah's easel and say something brief. The light along the jawbone should be a little warmer. Or, do not make the eyes prettier than the truth. Noah always listened. Once Arthur said to Noah, "You are close to touching something very rare. Do not rush to sell it cheaply." At the time, I was busy worrying about rent wedding invitations, the dress and the flowers. I did not know Arthur was seeing something in Noah that my family deliberately refused to see. And I had no idea that Arthur would be the one to open the door that forced the entire Carter family to swallow every contemptuous word they had ever spoken. Thanksgiving dinner that year was held at my parents' house in Glastonbury, in the dining room that had just been renovated with Grant's money. A new chandelier hung from the ceiling, the wooden table gleamed, and my mother moved back and forth with a kind of pride, as if that kitchen proved the Carter family still belonged to a different class. I arrived with Noah just as the sky was getting dark. He wore the dark blue shirt I had ironed that morning, and he carried the apple pie I had baked myself. I knew that pie could not compete with the 2 bottles of Napa Valley wine Vanessa had brought, but I still hoped my mother would say one kind thing. She took the pie, placed it on the kitchen counter, then turned toward Vanessa as my sister walked in. "Oh, this wine must be expensive, sweetheart." Vanessa smiled deliberately, speaking loudly enough for the whole room to hear. "Only $200 a bottle, Mom." Grant said the holidays deserve something worthy. I looked at the apple pie sitting silently beside the sink. No one opened the lid. No one asked how long it had taken me to make. It was just a homemade pie like me, in that family present, but not valuable enough to be noticed. Throughout dinner, Grant talked about a new apartment project in Stamford. My father listened closely, asking about interest rates, permits, and investors. Vanessa laughed, like someone who was used to having the entire table revolve around her. My mother looked at her with such tenderness that it hurt. Noah sat beside me quietly. He ate slowly, occasionally glancing at me as if asking whether I was all right. I gave him a faint smile, the kind of smile used to say, "Just endure a little longer." Then my father put down his knife and fork. He looked at Noah over the rim of his wineglass, his lips lifting into a polite smile. I knew that smile. It was the way my father prepared to wound someone while keeping his sleeves clean. "Noah," he said, "when are you going to get a real job?" The whole table went silent. Not the silence of surprise. It was the silence of people who had been thinking the same thing for a long time and were finally relieved that someone had said it for them. My mother looked down and adjusted her napkin. Grant smirked. Vanessa tilted her head. "Emily needs someone who can take care of her," Vanessa said. Love is beautiful, but bills do not pay themselves. I wanted to answer immediately, but Noah gently touched my hand under the table. Not to stop me, but to remind me that he was still there. Noah lifted his head. His voice was so calm that it made me feel both proud and heartbroken. I do have work, sir. It just does not look like yours. My father laughed. The problem is, banks do not accept dreams as payment. Grant laughed with him. Vanessa laughed too. My mother said softly, "Thomas, come on," but she did not truly stop him. I looked around the table and suddenly saw my place with painful clarity. I was not only the daughter who came second, I was also the person they believed could be humiliated in public and still be expected to behave politely. That night on the drive back to New Haven, I apologized to Noah again and again, as though my apologies could erase the contempt in my father's eyes. Noah only looked ahead. "You do not have to apologize for the way they treated me," he said. "But one day, Emily, you will have to stop apologizing for the way they treat you." I turned my face toward the window and let the darkness hide my tears. Back then, I still believed that if I tried long enough and loved them hard enough one day, they would finally see me. That January, Noah proposed to me in our ground floor studio. There was no expensive restaurant, no band, and no diamond ring for my mother to brag about. He asked me while we were sitting on the floor, surrounded by paintings that had not yet dried with thin snow gathering outside the window. The ring he gave me a week later was one he had carved himself from old walnut wood, polished so smooth that when I touched it, I felt as if I were holding a piece of his patience. I called my parents the next evening. I had thought that at least this time they would be happy. My father was silent for a few seconds, then asked about the wedding date. I told him it would be on June 14th in a small garden near Mystic. He said, "I'll check my calendar." Not congratulations. Not, "I'm proud of you." Just, "I'll check my calendar." 2 days later, he called back and said he would come, that he would walk me down the aisle. I believed that promise like a child believing in her father's hand. My mother asked how much everything would cost. Vanessa sent exactly one message: "Congratulations. Let me know if you need anything." Then silence. Her silence made me uneasy, because Vanessa was never silent when she truly wanted to help. Noah and I prepared everything ourselves. I painted the wedding invitations in watercolor. Noah built the arch from reclaimed wood from an old barn. We chose 42 white chairs. I did not need a big wedding. I only needed the people who truly mattered to be there. 3 weeks before the wedding, Aunt Patricia called me. Her voice was hesitant. "Emily, are you planning to go to Vanessa's baby shower first or just the wedding?" I was washing brushes in the sink. A drop of blue paint fell onto my wrist. "What shower?" She went quiet for a few seconds. Then she said very softly, "The baby shower." Also on June 14th, at Greenwich Country Club. I stood still. The water kept running. The paint on my hand spread like a bruise. I called Vanessa. She answered in a bright, gentle voice, the voice she always used when she had already prepared the lie. "Oh, Emily, I thought you knew. That place only had that date left. Besides, my shower is at noon and your wedding is in the afternoon. Everyone can go to both." Mystic was at least an hour and a half from Greenwich if the roads were clear. Her shower started at noon. My wedding started at 3 in the afternoon. No one could attend both without turning my wedding day into something they stopped by, out of obligation. She knew that. I knew that. And she still spoke as if I were the one making things difficult. "Vanessa," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "you have known my wedding date for a long time." She sighed, a tired, artificial sigh. "Emily, this is my first baby. You can get married any time." If you had been me in that moment, would you have given in or kept your wedding date? Comment keep if you believe there are some days no one should be allowed to take from you. I called my mother. She was not surprised. That was what hurt the most. You already knew about this. Vanessa is pregnant, sweetheart. She is very sensitive right now. The family needs to be there for her. And what about me? A silence. Then my mother said a sentence I would remember for a very long time. You are stronger than your sister Emily. You will understand. I understood. In this family, the person who endured the most would always be the one asked to lose the most. The refusals began to come in. Aunt Patricia apologized but said she had to go to Greenwich. Uncle Raymond said the family should prioritize the baby. My cousin said he would try to stop by if there was still time. Each message fell like another chair being pulled away from the garden I had imagined for months. That night, Noah found me sitting on the studio floor surrounded by wedding invitation envelopes I still had not sealed. I was not sobbing. I was just staring at the tiny flowers I had painted with the foolish hope of a daughter who still wanted to be chosen. Noah sat down beside me. We can change the date if you want. I looked at him for a long time. Then I shook my head. No. If I change the date this time, they will know for the rest of my life that my happiness can always be moved to another day. And for the first time, I no longer wanted to be the understanding daughter. 12 days before the wedding, I sat at the desk in our studio staring at the guest list where almost every name had been crossed out. On paper, everything still looked normal. The names of my relatives were still neatly written in their little boxes. Aunt Patricia. Uncle Raymond. Mom. Dad. Vanessa. Names that had once belonged to birthdays, Christmas mornings, family dinners, and old photos hanging along the staircase in the Carter house. But beside most of those names, I had been forced to write one short word. No. Not coming. Not sure. Maybe stopping by. Behind all those polite replies was one very clear truth. They had chosen Vanessa. I picked up my phone and reread the last message from my father. He had written that he would still try to come, that everything would be fine, that I should not overthink it. But he had not answered the only question I truly needed to hear. Are you still walking me down the aisle? That message showed as read. No answer. I called him again. The phone rang for a long time. When he finally answered, his voice was lower than usual, as if he were standing in a room where he did not want anyone else to hear him. Emily, I'm discussing it with your mother. I'm not asking, Mom. I'm asking you. Silence on the other end. I looked at Noah standing beside his easel, his hand still holding the brush, but no longer moving. He did not interrupt. He was just there like a silent anchor, keeping me from falling apart. You promised, I said. My father exhaled. I know. So are you coming? Another pause. I hated that pause. It sounded exactly like all the pauses from my childhood whenever Vanessa cried, and everyone turned to look at me as if I was supposed to be the first one to apologize. I'll try, sweetheart. I closed my eyes. No one says I'll try for something they truly want to do. That night, I wrote one group message to the entire family. I did not accuse anyone. I did not beg. I did not tell them how many times I had cried in the bathroom, so Noah would not hear me. I simply wrote the location, the ceremony time directions, parking information, and one final sentence. I hope to see you there. I sent the message close to 11 at night. No one replied. Not a single heart reaction. Not one. I'll try. Not one, your parents will be there. My phone lay on the table, its screen dark, while I sat staring at it like someone who had thrown a letter into the sea and waited for the waves to answer. The next morning, Rachel called me from Chicago. She had been my best friend since college and was now an emergency room nurse. Rachel had a very direct way of loving people, sometimes sharp as a knife, but always exactly where it needed to be. "I booked my flight," she said. "I'm coming." I smiled, but my throat tightened. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Your wedding is not an optional meeting." That sentence made me cry. Not because it made me sadder, but because someone had finally said out loud what I had been trying to tell myself for days. Over the next few days, I kept preparing everything as planned. I had my final dress fitting at a small tailor shop in Mystic. The ivory lace dress was one I had bought from a second-hand store, simple and soft, with sheer sleeves and a waist that fit just right. The older seamstress pinned the back and told me I looked as if I had stepped out of an old photograph. I had wanted my mother to be there to hear that, but my mother was busy choosing gifts for Vanessa's shower. The night before the wedding, I hung the dress on the closet door. Noah had fallen asleep on the sofa, exhausted after finishing the wooden arch. I stood alone in the pale yellow light, watching the dress move slightly, in the wind, slipping through the window. I still had not received a single message from my family. And strangely, inside that silence, a very small part of me began to calm down. Not because it no longer hurt, but because I had finally stopped imagining they might change at the last minute. Some answers do not need to be spoken. Silence is an answer too. On the morning of my wedding, I woke up before the alarm. New Haven was still covered in a thin layer of mist. Rachel sat on the edge of the sink holding a makeup brush, trying to act normal. "Breathe, Emily," she said. "I need the bride alive so I can apply blush." I laughed, but the sound faded quickly. The ivory lace dress hung on the closet door. My wedding bouquet sat in a glass jar on the kitchen table, white peonies, a few stems of lavender, and wildflowers. Noah had chosen from a farm near Mystic. Everything was beautiful, in the simplest way. Only my heart refused to stay still. My phone vibrated while Rachel was doing my eyeliner. My father's name appeared on the screen. I pressed the phone to my ear. Dead. There was a heavy breath on the other end. Then Thomas Carter's voice came through, low and dry. "Emily, I don't know how to say this. Vanessa's shower starts at noon. Your mother says if we leave early, people will think..." He stopped. But I had heard enough. "You're not coming," I said for him. "I'm sorry. But you understand, don't you? This is our first grandchild. You and Noah will still have many other occasions." I stood in front of the mirror looking at my half-finished face. One eye was sharply lined. The other was still red from a sleepless night. Suddenly, I looked like my entire life in the Carter house, half loved, half chosen. "No," I said. "Today is my only wedding day." He went silent. "You promised to walk me down the aisle." "Emily, don't make this harder." That sentence cut through me coldly. It was not abandoning me that made things hard for him. It was me reminding him of his promise. I put the phone down. My hand was shaking, but my eyes were dry. Rachel did not ask anything. She simply picked up the mascara and said, "Sit still. No one is allowed to ruin this face today." By the time we arrived at the garden in Mystic, the sky had turned a soft gold. The ceremony space was behind a small inn. Noah's wooden arch stood at the end of the aisle, wrapped in white fabric and eucalyptus leaves so beautiful that I had to stop for breath. 42 white chairs were arranged neatly in 2 rows. A small stem of lavender was tied to the back of each one. From a distance, the setting looked like a perfect wedding painting. Up close, the emptiness appeared like an open wound. 35 chairs had no one sitting in them. 7 people stood when they saw me. Rachel walked ahead to adjust my bouquet. 2 of Noah's art school friends, Daniel and Mira, sat on the left. A couple of my college friends had driven in from New York. Arthur Whitman stood in the front row wearing an old dark blue suit. Noah stood beneath the arch. When our eyes met, he lifted a hand to cover his mouth. He was trying not to cry. The violin began. I stood at the start of the aisle with no arm to hold. For one moment, I saw myself again at 7 years old, standing in the living room, waiting for my father to look at the first drawing I had ever made while he was busy listening to Vanessa talk about school. I had waited like that for years. Today, I did not want to wait anymore. I had just taken one step when I heard the soft sound of shoes touching the gravel behind me. "Miss Carter," Arthur said, his voice deep and warm. "If you allow me, an old man would be honored to walk beside you." I turned around. Arthur held out his arm. His eyes were calm without pity. He did not look at me like an abandoned girl. He looked at me like someone worthy of being walked down the aisle. "Arthur, you don't have to do this." "I know," he said. "But your father should be here. Since he has not let someone who truly values you do it." I placed my hand on his arm. We walked between the rows of empty chairs. The wind carried the scent of lavender gently through the air. 7 people rose to their feet. In that moment, I no longer saw the 35 empty seats. I only saw the 7 people who had chosen to be there. The ceremony lasted less than 15 minutes. Noah read his vows from a small canvas. I read mine from the back of an old illustration. We cried, laughed, and exchanged rings. When the officiant pronounced us, husband and wife, 7 people applauded as if the garden were full. I lost a family on my wedding day. But I also saw where a real family begins. Our wedding reception took place right there in the garden among the chairs that had witnessed both the most painful and the most beautiful moment of my life. There was no glittering ballroom, no towering wedding cake. We ordered a few boxes of pizza from a small place nearby. Rachel opened the wine, and Daniel connected his phone to an old speaker so music could play across the grass. Strangely, I laughed a lot. I laughed when Noah danced so clumsily he almost stepped on my dress. I laughed when Arthur raised his glass and offered a short toast. "To the people who know how to stay." I laughed when Rachel said 7 kind guests were better than 42 chairs filled with careless people. But as the sunset faded and everyone began clearing the tables, I sat down in an empty chair in the last row. The phone in my hand felt as heavy as stone. There was no message from my mother. No apology from my father. Not even a fake "congratulations" from Vanessa. I opened social media, even though I knew I should not. The first photo that appeared was Vanessa, standing among pink and gold balloons, one hand resting on her belly, surrounded by the familiar faces of my family. My mother was smiling brightly. My father stood beside Vanessa, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes so proud that I had to look away. The caption was only a few words. "Family is everything." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Family is everything. They had written those words while I was saying my vows in front of rows of empty chairs. That night, when we returned to the studio, Noah removed each stem of lavender from my wedding bouquet and placed them in small glass jars around the room. The scent made the old rented space feel like the ending of a dream. I sat on the sofa still wearing my wedding dress, my eyes so dry that I could not cry anymore. Noah sat down beside me. "I'm sorry," he said. I turned to him. "For what?" "For the fact that you had to walk through today like that." I shook my head, but the answer caught in my throat. What hurt was not only that they had missed the wedding. What hurt was that Noah had also been forced to watch himself be dismissed on a day when he should have been welcomed. "You deserved a family standing up and applauding for us," I whispered. Noah held my hand. I had one. They were sitting in those 7 chairs. I started crying when I heard that. Not loudly. Just tears falling after so many days of trying to stand upright. Over the next few days, I stopped waiting for the phone to ring. I returned to my drawing table. Noah returned to his easel. But his paintings changed. He began painting rows of empty chairs, dinner tables, missing one-person rooms with beautiful light that still felt cold. He called the series The Empty Row. One day, Arthur came down to the studio and stood in front of the garden painting for a long time. On the canvas, 7 chairs were occupied while the others held only sunlight. Arthur said nothing. He simply took out his phone, photographed the painting, and sent it to someone. I asked, "Who are you sending that to?" Arthur looked at me, his eyes gentle but difficult to read. "To someone who knows how to see value before the crowd learns to recognize it." I did not understand. I thought he was only encouraging Noah. I had no idea that a very large door had begun to open quietly, right there inside the studio, filled with the scent of linseed oil and lavender. 2 weeks after the wedding, Arthur invited Noah and me upstairs to his apartment for coffee. It was not the casual kind of invitation he usually gave. He called first, said clearly that there was something he needed to discuss, and his voice was so serious that Noah did not add a single brushstroke all morning. Arthur's apartment was right above our studio, and it was surprisingly simple. An old bookshelf, a few worn leather chairs, and windows overlooking the trees on Elm Street. On the kitchen table he had already set out 3 mugs, a French press, and a brown cardboard box tied with twine. Arthur sat down across from us, his hand resting on the lid of the box. "Perhaps I should have said this sooner," he said slowly. "But I wanted to be certain I was not mistaken." I looked at Noah. He was staring at the box, his face tense as a drawn string. Arthur opened it. Inside were exhibition catalogs, neatly clipped old newspaper articles, and photographs of him standing beside artists at openings in New York. In one faded photo, a small sign behind him read Whitman Gallery, Chelsea. I looked up. "You used to run a gallery." Arthur smiled, but there was a faint distance in his eyes. "For 22 years, I represented 41 artists. A few of them have paintings in museums now." The room went so quiet that I could hear the coffee dripping to the bottom of the press. He turned to Noah. "I have looked at paintings my entire life, Noah. I know the difference between someone who paints beautifully and someone who has something that makes people stop. You belong to the second group." Noah said nothing. I saw his wrist tighten slightly against his knee. Arthur took out another folder. "6 months ago, I sent photos of some of your work to Julian Marlowe, a private collector in Manhattan. He bought the first painting immediately." "How much?" Noah asked, his voice barely audible. $85,000. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. The number landed in that small kitchen like the toll of a huge bell. I looked at Noah. He lowered his head, his eyes turning red. "I was going to tell you after the wedding," he whispered. "I did not want that day to become about money. If you have ever watched someone who was underestimated finally be recognized for their true value, comment, deserved. Because some victories are not loud, but they make every old insult fall silent." Arthur continued, placing a thick contract on the table. Julian Marlowe wanted to commission Noah to paint 12 pieces over 18 months, with a total value of $450,000 paid in stages. At the same time, Caldwell House, a major gallery in Manhattan, had invited Noah to hold a solo exhibition. The centerpiece of the show would be the Empty Row series. I read each line with cold hands. Not from fear, but because our life was turning to another page so quickly that I had not yet found time to breathe. 3 days later, we went to Manhattan to sign the paperwork at Julian's lawyer's office. Noah wore his old suit. I sat beside him, while Arthur sat across from us, quiet as a man who had known this moment would come. When Noah signed his name on the final page, I suddenly remembered Thanksgiving dinner, my father's smile, and the question he had asked. "When are you going to get a real job?" A real job. I wanted to laugh, but my throat tightened. That afternoon on the way back to New Haven, Noah held my hand very tightly. He did not say much. Neither did I. Some life-changing moments do not need cheering. They only need one signature, one person who believes at the right time, and one truth that can no longer be hidden beneath the dust of poverty. My family still knew nothing. And that lack of knowledge would turn my next photo into the beginning of the biggest storm the Carter family had ever faced. 1 week after the contract signing in Manhattan, Julian Marlowe called Noah direct. Noah was standing in front of his easel at the time, his hand stained with cobalt blue, so he put the call on speaker. I was washing cups in the sink when I heard the voice of a man deep, slow, and so polite that every word seemed to be placed on the table in velvet. Noah Arthur told me that you and your wife never had a proper honeymoon. Noah looked at me. I stood still, water still running over my hands. Julian continued, "My yacht will be in Monaco next month. I would like the two of you to spend 10 days on it. Consider it a thank you for the first 3 paintings in the contract." I immediately shook my head. My whole life I had been used to refusing things that felt too large, as if accepting happiness were some form of greed. But Noah only looked at me for a long time, his eyes both gentle and firm. "Emily," he said, after the call ended, "this is not charity. This is how Julian builds relationships with artists. Arthur said he has always done this." I stayed quiet. In my mind I saw the garden in Mystic, the empty chairs, and my father's hand resting on Vanessa's belly, in the photo captioned, "Family is everything." Then I thought about how long I had lived by making myself smaller, so other people could feel more comfortable. This time I said yes. We flew to Nice on a July morning. From there a car took us to the harbor in Monaco. I had seen yachts in magazines before, but standing in front of one was something else entirely. The white vessel appeared beneath the sun like a floating building with polished curves and glass, reflecting the blue sea so vividly it almost looked unreal. The yacht was named Solara. Our cabin had a private balcony looking straight out over the Mediterranean. There were white flowers on the bed. In the bathroom, cold marble lay beneath my feet. I stood in the middle of that room with my old suitcase, and suddenly felt like laughing. The girl who had once counted every dollar to print wedding invitations was now standing in a place my mother probably would have lost sleep for a week if she had seen it. But what moved me was not the luxury. It was the way everyone on the yacht treated Noah. They called him an artist. They asked him about light, about his subjects, about absence in his paintings. No one asked when he was going to get a real job. No one looked at me as if I had chosen the wrong man. On Tuesday evening, Julian hosted a small dinner on the deck. There were collectors, curators, and an art critic from Berlin. When Julian raised his glass and introduced Noah as one of the most remarkable realist painters I have encountered in years, I had to look down at my hands so I would not cry. Noah sat beside me speaking about the empty row. He did not dramatize it. He simply said there are some empty spaces in a person's life so large that they become the main character. I knew he was talking about me. About us. About 42 chairs and the 7 people who stayed. On our final night aboard Solara, the sunset fell across the sea like melted gold. Noah stood behind me at the bow, his arms wrapped around my waist. On the small table beside us were 2 glasses of champagne and the Caldwell House catalog with the name Noah Bennett, printed clearly on the cover. I rarely posted photos, but that day I wanted to keep that moment. Not to show off. Not to take revenge. Only to remind myself that some painful days are not the end but the beginning of another life. I wrote a very short caption. Honeymoon with my husband. Grateful for the people who truly showed up. I posted the photo at 9 in the evening in Monaco, then placed my phone in the drawer. That night I slept deeply, listening to the water brushing softly against the hull like a lullaby. The next morning when I opened my phone, the screen was white, with notifications. 417 calls and messages. My father had called 23 times. My mother had sent message after message. Vanessa had sent exactly 3 texts, each one shorter but more panicked than the last. Aunts, uncles, cousins, the same people who had not been able to drive to Mystic suddenly had plenty of time to ask where I was, whose yacht it was, what Noah actually did, and why I had not told the family anything. I read each message in silence. Then I placed the phone face down on the table. For the first time in my life, I did not feel the need to answer immediately, just to make someone else feel at ease. 3 weeks after we returned from Monaco, Caldwell House sent a press release to the major art magazines. Noah Bennett's name appeared in the headline for his first solo exhibition, The Empty Row. I read those words in our ground floor studio, then looked over at Noah, who was quietly making coffee as if nothing had happened. Arthur stood by the window, holding his old mug. He only looked at Noah for a long moment and said, "Now let the work speak." And it spoke in a way no one in the Carter family had been prepared for. The first article appeared on a New York art website. Then a major newspaper published a photo of Noah standing in front of the central painting of the exhibition. That piece was called June 14th. A sunlit garden. A wooden arch wrapped in eucalyptus leaves. 42 white chairs arranged in 2 rows. 7 of them occupied. The remaining 35 empty, each one holding a small stem of lavender, as if preserving a promise that had been forgotten. I looked at the photo in the newspaper, and the old pain came back. But this time it did not bring me to my knees. Everything my family had once tried to bury under the phrase, "Don't make such a big deal out of it," was now hanging on the wall of a gallery in Manhattan. On opening night, more than 200 people walked into Caldwell House. They stood in front of Noah's paintings for a long time. Some wiped away tears. Some asked why the empty chairs made them feel as if they were looking at their own childhood. A journalist asked Noah, "Is June 14th autobiographical?" Noah looked at me. I gave a small nod. He answered, "It was my wedding day." 42 chairs. 7 people came. The room fell silent. When truth is placed in the right room, it does not need to shout for everyone to hear it. The next morning, a relative sent the article into the family group chat. I was no longer in that group, but Aunt Patricia took a screenshot and sent it to me. At first, there was silence. Then came the awkward questions. Was that Emily's wedding? Why didn't we go again? Vanessa, what happened? Vanessa answered first. She's trying to humiliate the whole family. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Even with the truth hanging on a wall, she still believed my pain was only a weapon aimed at her. After Vanessa's message, my father wrote, "Maybe we should have gone to the wedding." Just one sentence. Late, weak. But it was the first time I had seen my father not stand completely on her side. Vanessa could not bear that. Her friends began asking about Noah. They had once looked at him like a poor painter clinging to her younger sister. Now they were asking why she had not attended the wedding of an artist being discussed in Manhattan. Her story of a happy family suddenly had a hole too large to cover with beautiful photos. Grant called Noah too. "Noah, congratulations. I have a few clients who might want to commission paintings." Noah answered very politely, "Thank you, Grant. But right now, all my work is handled through Caldwell House and Arthur." I almost smiled. Not out of satisfaction. Some doors once slammed in your face only open again after you have stopped waiting outside them. Then the real collapse came for the Whitmore family. 2 months after the exhibition, Grant's real estate company filed for bankruptcy protection. 2 projects in Stamford failed. The bank tightened its claims. Vanessa's SUV disappeared from her photos. Her Cartier bracelet was listed for sale on a designer resale site. My mother's secondary credit card was canceled. The money Grant had once paid toward the house in Glastonbury stopped as well. When money was still flowing into the Carter house, I was the daughter who could be overlooked. When that stream ran dry, my parents' phones began reaching for me. My father called on a rainy afternoon. "Emily," he said, his voice tired, "I know I have no right to ask. But your mother and I may lose the house." I stood by the window. I had once longed to hear my father need me. But not like this. Not after everything. "Dad," I said, "I am not your backup plan. I am your daughter. And you treated me as if I were something that could be postponed." The other end of the line went silent for a long time. This time I was no longer afraid of that silence. I did not answer my father. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because for the first time in my life, I understood that silence could also be a boundary. I had spent too many years soothing other people's discomfort until I had forgotten to ask whether I was the one in pain. 3 days later, I called him back. I told him I would not pay off their debt, and I would not become the new wallet replacing Grant. But I agreed to pay for them to meet with a financial advisor and a real estate lawyer if they wanted to save the house through honesty and transparency. My father was quiet, then said, "I understand." It was not an apology yet, but it was the first time he did not turn the story back toward himself. Vanessa called me 2 days after that. "Emily, we are sisters," she said. "Are you really going to let everything fall apart because of one wedding day?" I looked at the wooden ring Noah had made on my ring finger. "It was not just one wedding day," I said. "It was a lifetime of being asked to stand behind you. It was because you knew that day mattered to me and chose to take it anyway. It was because you made the whole family believe that choosing me meant betraying you." The other end went silent. For the first time, Vanessa did not have an answer ready. I continued, "If you want to step back into my life, you have to begin with the truth, not with your need to be forgiven." She hung up. I put the phone down, and strangely, I did not fall apart. I only felt lighter. 6 months later, Noah and I moved into a small house in Westport not far from the sea. The lower floor was turned into a studio for Noah. I placed my drawing table near the kitchen door where morning sunlight fell in golden patches across the paper. We paid for it with our own work. No one else's name was on the paperwork. No pity. No conditions attached. Arthur came over for dinner every Sunday. He usually brought a bottle of wine that was not expensive but tasted good, then sat at the table as if he had belonged there for a long time. Sometimes a family does not begin with blood. It begins in the moment someone chooses to stand beside you when everyone else turns away. One October afternoon, my father appeared on the porch, holding a wooden frame. "I did not come to ask for money," he said. "I came to apologize." He looked at me, his eyes red. I sat in a country club eating sandwiches, while my daughter walked down the aisle with 7 people watching. I will have to live with that for the rest of my life. Then he handed me the frame. Inside was the certificate from the state art award I had won when I was 16. I found it in the attic. It should have been hung up a long time ago. I accepted it. Not because everything had been repaired. Some cracks do not disappear just because someone says sorry. But I recognized the first brick being laid down if the person placing it was truly willing to lower their head. Vanessa later sent me a handwritten letter. There was one sentence in it that I read over and over again. "I chose that date on purpose because I was afraid that if your wedding was happy, the family would not need me the way they used to." I did not forgive her immediately. I did not tear up the letter either. I placed it in a drawer. If you have ever had to learn how to love your family while still keeping boundaries for yourself, comment boundaries. Sometimes growing up does not mean leaving forever. It means never returning as the version of yourself that was easiest to wound. Now, whenever I stand on the porch and watch the lavender bloom in the garden, I no longer count the empty chairs. I remember the 7 people who stood when I walked down the aisle. I remember Arthur's hand. I remember Noah's eyes. I remember myself in that old lace dress, refusing to turn around and run. 42 chairs. 7 people stayed. 417 messages came too late. In the end, those numbers did not define me. What defined me was the day I stopped setting myself on fire to keep warm, the people who had never been afraid of letting me freeze.